All right. Welcome back, folks. I'll try to speak up a little bit more during the Dharma talk so you can all hear. I'd like to begin the talk with a memory. When I was a teenager, one of my favorite things to do was to go backpacking. We would go deep into the backcountry carrying everything that we needed on our backs. We'd hike out to remote lakes and to mountains. And as part of this experience, we needed to hike from water source to water source to refill our bottles. And sometimes this would be from a tiny spring, maybe a creek, or water from a large lake. And we carried these little teeny hand pumps that filtered out the bacteria. And the filters were pretty good, but if the water that we found was too murky or too filled with silt or too covered over with moss or overgrowth, then the filters wouldn't be able to function and we couldn't drink the water. So we needed our water to be somewhat clear in order to sustain us and to survive on our journey together. So I remember this experience recently when I was thinking about the mind. Our mind is a little like the water we would find on our backpacking trips. When the mind is clear, it can be life-giving. But if the mind is too agitated, too murky, too overgrown, then it's really hard to see clearly. So the Buddha named 5 specific states of mind that create this lack of clarity. These are the 5 hindrances. And the 5 hindrances are known for covering over and for obscuring our inner wisdom. They contract the mind. And typically, if we're having a difficult time, one of the hindrances is likely at work. So some of you may be familiar with the hindrances, some of you may not be. They are sense desire, that's the wanting mind, ill will, often referred to as aversion. And these two, the first two, they're 2 sides of the same coin, wanting and not wanting. The third is sleepiness, typically translated as sloth and torpor. It's an archaic phrase. The fourth is restlessness. That's mental and physical agitation, often high energy, with restlessness, it's high energy. If we think of sleepiness and restlessness as 2 energetic states, of course, sleepiness is the lower energy and restlessness would be the higher energy. And then the last of the 5 is doubt. So I think, Robin, I gave you the little list of the hindrances. Will you put those in the chat? So for any of you who are visual learners, you can have the little list in the chat for you to reference. The Buddha compared the hindrances to a bowl of water. This was very similar to my experience backpacking. So in an unafflicted mind, the water's clear, but in a mind that's afflicted by the hindrances, that's not the case. The doubtful mind, he compared to murky water. The sleepy mind is like water that's been overgrown with moss. The restless mind is stirred up water. The aversive mind is boiling water, kind of like as though it's boiling with anger. And the desirous mind is like water filled with colorful dye, a shade that's kind of entrancing. So we're not really seeing clearly through the water. We're kind of enchanted by the colors. So in all cases, the mind isn't clear. So this is an ancient metaphor that the Buddha uses. And of course, lucky for us, the Buddha provides us with some approaches for working with these hindrances. So in this talk, I'll share a general singular practice that can be used for working with all 5 hindrances, kind of a one-size-fits-all practice. And then I'll go through each hindrance one by one to share some specific information about each, as well as some particular ways for practicing with them. So to begin with, here's the one-size-fits-all practice that you can do to meet all the hindrances. And if this is the only thing that you remember from this talk, it will serve you well. It's really simple. 2 steps: recognize and feel. Recognize and feel. So that first piece, recognize, we're just recognizing what's present in the same way that we did in the meditation. Like, oh, this is wanting, or oh, this is sleepiness. It's really helpful to know the hindrance as a hindrance. We're so often transfixed by the storyline of what we want or what we hate, that we don't even know that desire or aversion are fueling the whole show. So sometimes just the act of naming something can make it lose its power. Sometimes if there's something within us that's asking for attention, maybe coming up again and again in the mind, it can really help to recognize it, to identify it, and give it the attention it's been seeking. Sometimes when we can really name something, it has the attention it's been asking for, and it will release. So Dan Siegel coined the phrase, name it to tame it. And sometimes just this act of naming will tame whatever has arisen. And of course, as I imagine all of you know, often simple recognition doesn't cause things to evaporate, does not cause the hindrance to dispel. So then we have the opportunity to continue practicing with it. This is when we bring in part 2. This is when we feel the hindrance. And specifically, we're feeling it in the body. So we're getting to know the hindrance, getting curious about it, and investigating what's going on. So often when we're entranced by a hindrance, there's typically an object we're fixated on. So if there's, especially for desire and ill will, so we might be fixated on wanting a new haircut, and that might be desire in the mind, right? Or we're feeling annoyed by our roommate who never takes out the trash, and that's aversion in the mind. So we're really preoccupied by the object, with the haircut or the roommate. And instead, in this way of working with the hindrances, we let go of obsessing about the object. And instead, we turn our attention 180 degrees to look inward at the desire, at the aversion, at the restlessness itself. And this begins to pull us out of the trance. It begins to pull us out of the daydream. So rather than trying to get rid of the hindrance, which is what many of us do, I imagine, should speak for myself. It's really easy to want to get rid of an unpleasant feeling, right? But rather than try to get rid of it, can we instead recognize it and feel it, turning 180 to recognize and feel what's happening. So when I say feel, just to be a little bit more specific about that, like how do we feel it, or how do we get curious about it? So when I say feel, that's sensing it in the body. The language that the body speaks in the language of sensation. So is there tightness, or contraction, or pressure, or tingling, or heat associated with what's happening? Or is there high energy or low energy in the body? And we can feel the hindrance in the mind also. What's the emotional tone? We were doing this in the meditation. How does the hindrance color the mind? What does it make you want to do? Are there repeating thought patterns? Are the thoughts loud or quiet? So there's all these different ways that we can explore from a present moment perspective what's happening for us. We're not just getting caught in the narrative. We're observing the mind and the body grounded in the present moment. Okay, so that's it. 2 steps: recognize and feel. And it's through this felt experience of touching the hindrance, where we actually sense the suffering in it, like, oh, it's actually, wanting has a kind of, it's painful, and not being content with things as they are, that's painful. Aversion is painful. Restlessness, there's some suffering to the agitation of that. So as we just bring our mindful awareness to these different states, our system naturally learns to let go of the hindrance. It's kind of like if we keep touching a hot stove, eventually, like, we learn, stop doing that. Like if I put my hand on the stove, it's gonna hurt. I don't have to convince myself not to put my hand on the stove. I just know not to do it. In the same way, the mind heart, the chitta, when it really is present for the suffering of hindrances again and again, eventually it goes, ooh, I'm not going to touch that stove anymore. And you don't have to let go of the hindrance. The wisdom lets go of the hindrance. The wisdom that knows that's a hot stove. It will release the hindrance on its own. So so that's the basic, one size fits all practice. So now I'm going to go through each of the 5 hindrances. So then you really get a sense of what they're all about, and you'll be more equipped to actually recognize them when they occur, because you'll have a better sense of how they operate in the mind. So number 1, sense desire. So in Buddhism, we have the 5 senses that we're all familiar with, sight, sound, smell, etc. And then in Buddhism, we add in the mind. So there's the 6 senses. So this is sense desire, any of those sense doors. In terms of the desire piece, this hindrance includes craving. It includes longing, grasping, wanting to acquire things. And this tendency is at work when we long for a cup of coffee, or when we seek to look more physically beautiful, or we want to see what's visually appealing, or when we get fixated on recreating a blissful meditation experience, or the mind daydreams about romance. These are all expressions of sense desire. And generally, what's at the heart of sense desire is a feeling that there's something that could make this a better moment, that this moment is insufficient, and that happiness resides in the next sense pleasure. There's something else out there. At one point, the Dalai Lama visited an abbey in Germany. And this abbey was known for making fruitcake and cheese. And during his visit, the monks took him on a lengthy tour of the abbey, and they viewed all the different areas. That evening, when the Dalai Lama had a chance to sit down and talk with the monks, he recounted the tour, sharing that all throughout the tour, the monks kept offering him samples of cheese, and kept offering cheese and more cheese and more cheese. But he had to confess, even as the Dalai Lama, all he really wanted the whole time was cheesecake, or was fruitcake. He probably would have been happy if it was cheesecake too, but not just cheese. So here, the Dalai Lama also dealing with sense desire. And of course, upon sharing this confession of sense desire, he threw his head back with laughter, holding with total transparency and non-identification. Nothing to hold on to here. So if you find yourself experiencing sense desire, you're in good company. You're not alone. And when sense desire arises, can you meet it with equal humor and wisdom? And one way we can do that is just by recognizing it and feeling it, how I shared, recognizing it's present, feeling it in the body, noticing if there's any contraction associated with the desire. What's that like? Maybe noticing the bewitchment of the desire. Noticing the way that it can be kind of entrancing, like the image of getting that thing you've been wanting plays in the mind, and there's like a little hit of pleasure with that. So it might seem pleasant on the surface, and when we're a little bit more settled, we can see that that craving, that forward lean, isn't as peaceful as contentment, as not needing to get anything to be happy. So these are some basic characteristics of sense desire, some ways that you might see it in your experience, some ways you might practice with it. And if you're having a hard time staying mindful of the sense desire, of recognizing and feeling, then you can try an antidote. So each of the 5 hindrances have antidotes. And just in the same way with the normal use of the term, an antidote's traditionally in medicine taken to counteract a particular poison, and this isn't any different. So when do we apply an antidote? when we're overwhelmed with a hindrance or have this sort of like, I can't deal with this feeling, something like that, then it's okay, it's time to try an antidote. You've practiced with mindfulness for a while and it's not soft, the hindrance isn't softening. So then, okay, let's try an antidote to support the mind, to restore its natural balance. So one of the antidotes for sense desire is attuning to impermanence or inconstancy. So of course, we all know this, but the heart doesn't always realize it, that whatever it is that we want will pass away in time. And it can be helpful to reflect that even if I get what I want, and it lasts for a long time, my enchantment with it usually passes pretty swiftly. You may have had the experience where you bought something and you're just so excited to have it and you just can't wait and you're so happy. And then a month later, you still own it, but it's like, pretty neutral. It just kind of fades into this background. In the background, this thing that was just like, yeah, I've got to have this, so excited. So just the act of remembering impermanence can be useful. So that's like a reflection, right? Now we can actually shift from reflection to a clear seeing of impermanence actually in our meditation practice. So by observing the arising and passing of things, to actually observe impermanence at work in our meditation, this can more deeply mature our insight into impermanence and inconstancy. Because what happens when we see that in our practice again and again, you're watching the passing away of sounds and sensations in the body, the passing away of moods, of thoughts. We begin to understand at a deeper level how everything is falling away and changing. So when we really see that, it's hard to be fooled by sense desire because we know the pleasure will pass. So that's one of the antidotes, so reflecting on and observing impermanence. So you can keep that in your pocket if you ever need it for sense desire. Now, lastly, and the Buddha recommended this for all of the hindrances, don't miss recognizing when the hindrance is absent. So you've been working with the hindrance. When it finally passes, allow yourself to feel the goodness of a mind that's free of sense desire. Really allow it to register that felt experience of contentment when the wanting is absent. And of course, the more satisfaction that you're present for in your life, moments where you're content, the less likely it is that this mechanism of sense desire will kick in to begin with. So just being present makes such a difference here, being present for both the satisfaction and for the lack of satisfaction. Okay, so let's shift now to the second hindrance, ill will or aversion. So this can manifest as anger, as not liking, judgment, resentment, fear, guilt, boredom, many states that fall under the heading of aversion. And for anyone who has been following the news, emotions like anger, fear, grief, judgment, all of these might sound familiar to you and maybe somewhat close at hand these days. If so, recognizing these responses as aversion, oh, this is the hindrance of aversion, and practicing with that can be a really useful tool. So maybe reading the news can be one of your hindrance practice points, if that's an area where you find yourself getting triggered. So as with desire, recognizing it, turning away from the obsession or fixation on the object that's activating us, and doing the 180-degree turn to name, oh, this is aversion. Okay, this is in me, and I just need to be with this to feel it. The Zen teacher Lien Shut talks about this hindrance as the terrible twos, as in TOOS, So we can know this aversion is happening, that when the mind is saying too messy or too cold, too many bugs, too itchy, too loud. So this might, if you notice the mind relating to experience in that way, to this, to that, aversion might be at work. So a likely sign. And again, here, if the mind is unable to be mindful of the hindrance, or it's overwhelmed, then you can shift to the antidote. So the antidote for aversion is metta. And at the end, I'll give you a little list of the antidotes for each. Metta, or loving kindness practice. The friendly mind of kindness actually obstructs aversion. The sense of anger or disliking can't actually arise in a heart that's filled with loving kindness. If, however, you're already angry, it can be really, it's a tall order to practice loving kindness for the person you're angry with. That's a pretty high bar. You can try if you like. And I find, for me, if I'm angry, it's often too inaccessible to send kindness to the other, but that's a moment when it's best to send metta to myself. So metta practice, you might do, there's a variety of ways to practice metta, and I won't go into the full practice here, but the loving kindness phrases: may I be happy, may I be free from suffering, may I be safe and free from harm. These are some of the metta phrases. And I also want to note, for those of you who do have a metta practice, it's okay if you don't feel loving when you do it. Often we think we need to really have that juicy heart sense when we practice metta, but that's actually not necessary. Just even saying the phrases plants the seed. Just the wish to be kind is actually enough. So then, as mentioned already, when the aversion subsides, enjoy it, don't miss it, be present for that. Okay, so that's our first and second, desire and aversion, the two sides of the same coin, wanting and not wanting. And so now we'll go to the third hindrance. And the fourth, by the way, these are the two that are characterized by low energy and by high energy. So the third is sloth and torpor. This refers to drowsiness, fatigue, sleepiness, dullness. And often sloth will typically refer to a mental sleepiness, and torpor to a physical tiredness. Just knowing this hindrance as sleepiness will totally suffice. And it's interesting to look at the sources of sleepiness. So sometimes sleepiness in our meditation can come forth because we're actually genuinely tired, like actually depleted. This is kind of the garden variety, sloth and torpor. But then it can also come, we can also end up feeling sleepy as we acclimate to a quiet mind during meditation, because of course, a quiet mind isn't quite as entertaining as our inner fantasies. So sometimes there can be a sort of bored sleepiness that arises. And then lastly, there can be sleepiness as a defense mechanism. There's like, for some people, there can be a shutting down of attention. Sleepiness comes in because we don't want to face something in our life. We don't want to feel something that might be coming up. So for me, in my early retreats, I had a lot of sleepiness. Okay, I had a lot of like the head bobbing, bucking bronco sort of sleepiness in my meditations. And it was tremendously unpleasant. And there was a lot of fighting it. And what I learned through this period was that much of my suffering with the sleepiness was my resistance to it. My sense that the sleepiness shouldn't be here, and this is, I'd be having a very nice meditation if it wasn't for this tiredness that kept haunting me. So for me, it was actually the aversion that was making it making the experience a suffering state. So what I learned is that sleepiness is actually karmically neutral. Sleepiness is fine, it's not bad. But what was happening to me was a multiple hindrance attack, the combination of sleepiness followed by aversion. So the good news is that we don't need to resist sleepiness. We can just actually bring mindfulness into the tranquil state. And we can continue to be with that, whatever our object is. So we can just continue to be with the breath from a tired place. And it's fine if there's periods of meditation where the mind isn't as clear. You know, if say the last period of meditation for the day is sleepy, then we can just be sleepy Buddha. Like, okay, we're just sleepy Buddha right now. That's fine. So we practice recognizing our sleepiness, we practice feeling it. And particularly, I want to underline for this hindrance, the feeling part, and really emphasize the curiosity and investigation factor, because both of those qualities of mind raise energy. So if we can become curious about sleepiness, that often brings in just enough energy to stay with it and to stay present with it. Because I've had so many opportunities to practice with it, sleepiness has actually become very interesting to me. So just as an example of the sort of things that got me interested and helped me befriend this hindrance through my curiosity is I started being curious about, like, where is the sleepiest spot in my entire body? Like, where is the epicenter of my sleepiness? And I often found it might be behind one of my eyes. And if I went to the epicenter, I dipped out. And if I kind of stayed away from the epicenter of the body, I was a little more awake. Or I got really curious about seeing the moment the mind slipped into a sleep state. Like, could I catch the mind as it moved from awakeness to sleep? Or am I falling asleep on an in-breath or an out-breath? Or if I'm counting the breaths, what breath am I falling asleep on? Like, oh, okay, it seems that I disappear around breath 7 every time, 1 to 10. Oh, there I go. So these are just some ways you can turn up the volume on curiosity, and that can bring in just a little energy to your present-centered investigation of sleepiness. And then, of course, there's the classic antidote, which is energy. So, of course, if you're sleepy, the antidote's energy. So you can try opening your eyes, sit up straighter, take a few deep breaths. And if that's not cutting the mustard, you can go for a brisk walk. The Buddha actually suggested these, splash water on your face. And if you need to, go take a nap. It's not a crime to go take a nap instead of meditate. Okay, so then we have restlessness. So shifting now to the fourth hindrance. So with restlessness, this is an overabundance of energy. It's sometimes referred to as worry and flurry. And we can see it in a variety of ways in our practice. So there's we can see it mentally and physically. So mental restlessness sometimes occurs as agitation, anxiety, worrying. Physically, sometimes it's the restlessness of not being able to sit still, of fidgeting, shifting, not being able to land. Or sometimes off the cushion, it might come forth as needing to keep doing things, like getting home from work and racing around because you can't stop the momentum of the day. So with restlessness, it can be helpful to remember that this is a really natural part of being human. The author Mark Lesser reminds us that we are the descendants of the nervous apes. All of the chilled out apes got eaten. So it's the nervous apes that lived on to make baby apes. And those are all our ancestors. So this anxiety is a very, very old habit. So you don't have to be hard on yourself if you notice this sort of restlessness in you. And so while restlessness can manifest physically, and it also has that aspect of mental emotional anxiety, it can also present as a much deeper and more subtle habit of mind. So this is the habit of mind that says happiness is just out of reach. So Ajahn Amaro and Pasano put it really beautifully in the book, The Island. So they say, of the 10 obstacles or fetters that stand in the way of enlightenment, the penultimate is restlessness. The restlessness to which this refers is not just the fidgeting of the uncomfortable meditator. It is the subtlest of feelings that there might be something better over there or just in the future. A feeling that which is out of reach might have more value in some way than this. It is the ever so insidious addiction to time and its promises. I love that last line. Restlessness, it's the ever so insidious addiction to time and its promises. So there's just something better out of reach. So as one nears full enlightenment, restlessness is one of the very last fetters to be uprooted. It's so deeply conditioned in us to lean towards some better future moment. So we can think of restlessness as manifesting at different levels of subtlety. On a coarser level, there's the physical restlessness, then the mental emotional anxiety, then the even more subtle level, that ongoing sense of, there might be something better just out of reach. So the antidote for restlessness is calm or tranquility. So if you feel restless, return to your meditation anchor, maybe the breath, a soundscape, a global sense of the body, whatever your anchor is. Return to the anchor and just hang out there for a while. And if you can, do it in a gentle way, in a way that invites the mind to rest. Because what we're doing here is we're allowing the mind to gravitate around something simple. And this can be a refuge for the mind that's racing around and tangled up in complex anxiety-producing storylines. So we're just allowing the mind to settle. That's how we do. This is a way to collect the mind, to gather the mind. For some people, focusing on the anchor, a meditation anchor, actually can lead to tightening and increased energy. And if that's you, then you can try giving the mind a wider pasture, opening the attention to sounds in a wide way to bring in calm. So there's a variety of different approaches to this. Okay, so that's our fourth hindrance. And then lastly, we have doubt. So this doubt can present in a lot of ways. So it can be doubt in the Buddha's teachings, like, does this really work? I should have tried chakra realignment therapy instead of meditation. I don't know if I like this. Or it might come in as a doubt in your teachers, or doubt in yourself, doubt in your own capacity to meditate. Like, oh, well, others can get enlightened, but I can't. Or, I'm not any good at this. Well, on the night of the Buddha's enlightenment, the demon Mara, this is in Buddhist cosmology, the demon Mara went and visited the Buddha. And Mara's goal was to prevent the Buddha's awakening. So Mara pulls a variety of tricks. He tries to distract the Buddha with his armies, and he tempts the Buddha with beautiful women. And Mara's final ammunition is that he says to the Buddha, "Who do you think you are that you could be enlightened?" So Mara's final ammunition to the Buddha is to evoke doubt. So doubt is a very powerful force to reckon with. Who do you think you are? And at that moment, the Buddha touched the earth and said, "With the earth as my witness, I have a right to be here." And he became free. So self-doubt can be a very powerful visitor. It's not easy to work with. There was a time early in my meditation practice where I had a lot of self-doubt about my ability to meditate. And I would get into these really painful feelings of inadequacy. And so one day I was sitting, mulling over my sense of impending insufficiency when something interesting happened. A thought appeared in the mind, and it said, "This is just doubt." I was like, oh. Like there was just a very clear recognition that whatever, big narrative, oh, just doubt. All that's happening right now is doubt. And doubt is just one of the hindrances. I know I don't have to take the hindrances personally. And with the recognition, doubt, it was as though the magic spell had been lifted. The naming of the doubt completely released its power, and the entire package fell away. And in that moment, I didn't need to try to let go of the doubt. The mind's inner wisdom let go of the doubt. Name it to tame it, right? And the mind had been so present for doubt and the pain it created over and over. So the mind saw that and said, "I don't need to grab that hot pan again. I know doubt. We're not doing that." So something that can help with doubt is remembering, that you don't need to evaluate or judge your progress. So if we go to a guitar lesson for the first time, we don't expect to be a Grammy-winning musician the next day. And sometimes in meditation, we kind of expect, like, okay, I should be able to sit down and turn off thinking and experience bliss states. Like, okay, why isn't that happening? But it's these expectations, and instead the practice is really like, can we be patient with ourselves? Can we refrain from giving ourselves a report card? So the antidote for doubt is faith. Another word for faith, some people that word doesn't resonate. So another word you might use is trust or confidence. So can we trust that whatever is arriving for us is arriving right on time? Can we trust that we're on the right track? Can we trust the Dharma? Can we trust the practice? Can we have confidence in the practice? Can we have confidence in ourselves? So if you're somebody who deals with doubt, build a daily faith practice. So that might mean reflecting on why you're practicing, recollecting moments in your life when the practice is really helpful for you, really beneficial. I saw a sign a while ago that said, "Proceed as though success were inevitable." And when I saw that, I went, yeah, not a lot of us do that, do we? So can we trust that if we show up with mindfulness and curiosity, that the practice is reliable? We just have a little confidence in that. Can we proceed as though success were inevitable? Okay, so those are the 5 hindrances. And our task with them is just to recognize and feel, and then don't miss the moments when you're free from hindrance. Robin, would you put the list of antidotes in the chat? Great, thank you. So if it's helpful for you, there's a little list of the antidotes in the chat right now. And maybe just to say them aloud for those who don't want to have to look at the screen. Sense desire, reflecting on and observing impermanence. Aversion, ill will, it's metta or loving kindness. For sloth and torpor, it's energy. For restlessness, it's calm. And for doubt, it's faith or trust or confidence. Okay, so maybe most importantly, what about the attitude towards the hindrances? As we recognize and feel the hindrances, it's really important to notice our relationship to it. So often we judge ourselves for it. Often we find that the hindrance of aversion is kind of like a shadow with the other hindrances. It's sometimes I call it the tag-along hindrance, because one hindrance arises and then aversion sweeps in right behind it, rejecting that hindrance. So if that happens, then we just notice, okay, sleepiness and aversion, or wanting and aversion. And as much as possible, bringing attention to whatever's there. And that's okay if the aversion comes in, but seeing if you can keep it simple. See if you can stick to one hindrance if that's available to you. And remember, having hindrances doesn't say anything about your worth as a meditator or your skill as a meditator. The Buddha had hindrances up to his night of awakening. So our job is just to meet them without resistance, and really relating to them as an opportunity to transform them. We can think of them as valuable messengers that have come to teach us. Rather than relating to them as a diversion from the path, we can really see them as the path itself. We can see the hindrance as the next stepping stone on the path. So it's not something going wrong when a hindrance is there. Instead, can we consider our hindrances as the medium by which we wake up? So in a way, learning to be with the hindrance, learning to be with it without rejection, it's really a radical act of inclusion, of making ourselves whole, such that there's nothing we're rejecting, nothing we're excluding, and there's nothing left out. So I'll close with a very short poem by Izumi Shikibu, who's a female Japanese poet from the 10th century. And it goes like this. Watching the moon at dawn, solitary mid-sky, I knew myself completely, no part left out. Watching the moon at dawn, solitary mid-sky, I knew myself completely, no part left out. Thank you very much, everyone. So let's sit for a moment together. Thank you for your kind attention.